Madam President, I rise today in strong support of the conference report to accompany the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act, better known as the Customs Conference Report, on which we just had a cloture vote. And I was very pleased to see 73 United States senators vote in favor of proceeding to and getting a final vote on the conference report. It's important because this legislation represents the most significant update to our trade enforcement policies in over a decade, and its passage today and enactment into law will demonstrate yet again that this Congress is working in a bipartisan manner. This bill is important for a lot of reasons, Madam President. First and foremost, this legislation is about trade enforcement. This bill gives the U.S. Customs and Border Protection new tools to combat unfair trade practices, thus protecting American jobs and American workers. These enforcement provisions are important to a wide range of American manufacturers, which is why the National Association of Manufacturers and the American Iron and Steel Institute strongly support this bill. In fact, there are approximately 100 organizations and businesses that have expressed public support for this bill. For any senator who has manufacturing in his or her state, supporting this conference report should be a no-brainer. These enforcement provisions are important to many other sectors of the economy as well. Take honey producers, for example, who in my home state make South Dakota one of the top honey-producing states in the nation. Back in 2011, I was the ranking member of the Trade Subcommittee of the Finance Committee, and Senator Wyden at that time was the chairman of that subcommittee. We held a hearing on the topic of how America can better enforce our trade laws, and we heard testimony from Richard Ady, a well-known honey producer in my home state of South Dakota, about the problem of honey laundering. Simply put, honey laundering is the practice of unscrupulous honey producers in China using third-party countries to circumvent tariffs on dumped Chinese honey. Over the past decade, this has been a major problem, costing U.S. honey producers hundreds of millions of dollars in lost revenue. As just one example of this practice, consider Malaysia, a nation with the capacity to produce about 45,000 pounds of honey annually. Well, get this, Madam President. Malaysia has exported as much as 37 million pounds of honey to the United States in a year, well beyond its production capacity. Clearly, this honey is not coming from Malaysia. It is Chinese honey being transshipped through that nation. The legislation that we're considering today is finally going to give Customs the tools that it needs to help crack down on this practice. This will not only benefit honey producers in my state, it will benefit farmers all across the country whose crops depend upon bees for pollination. And it will benefit American consumers who can buy American honey with confidence. Madam President, while this bill is about enforcing our trade laws, it is also about making it easier for American businesses to engage in trade. This is especially important to small businesses that may not always have the resources or the expertise to access foreign markets. The conference report before us includes a provision that I authored with Ranking Member Wyden that would update the so-called de minimis threshold for imports from $200 per product to $800 per product. The bill also includes an amendment that Senator Bennett and I offered at the Finance Committee calling on our trading partners to follow our lead in this area. What this simply means, Madam President, is that if someone starts a small business selling goods on the internet and he or she needs to import a component part in order to make a product, we're going to significantly reduce the paperwork and cost involved in doing so. This is the reason that online marketplaces such as Etsy and eBay, as well as express shippers like UPS and FedEx, are so supportive of this legislation. These companies understand what millions of American entrepreneurs understand, that the internet truly is the shipping lane of the 21st century. This bill will empower more Americans to engage in global commerce, both through the internet and through more traditional means. This conference report will also help to ensure that access to the internet, which is so important for global commerce, remains unencumbered. This legislation includes a provision to make the existing ban on internet access taxes permanent, something that Senator Wyden and I have championed, and a measure that has broad bipartisan support. The Internet Tax Freedom Act has been extended 8 times since it was first enacted in 1998. As I mentioned earlier, the Internet is increasingly a gateway to economic opportunity, often in the form of accessing new markets abroad. As chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, one of my top priorities is expanding access to high-speed Internet from our inner cities to our most rural communities and keeping access to the Internet unburdened by new taxes is an important step in that direction. This Internet tax freedom provision is strongly supported by a broad spectrum of technology, cable, and telecom companies, and it is also something that will benefit America's manufacturers. As the National Association of Manufacturers wrote recently in an op-ed supporting this bill, I quote, "The Internet has become a critical piece of infrastructure for manufacturers in the United States, and permanently extending the ban on state and local taxes on Internet access will continue to foster investment in broadband networks," end quote. I was especially pleased that we were able to include a provision in the conference report granting states that already apply taxes on Internet access more than 4 years to adjust to the new law. I'm confident that this will give Congress the time necessary to address other important issues relating to Internet taxation. Enactment of the permanent ITFA provision in this bill will clear the path for consideration of legislation empowering states when it comes to collecting sales taxes that are owed. I intend to continue to support efforts to ensure that we have a level playing field when it comes to the taxation of Internet commerce, something that is very important in my home state of South Dakota. Last, Madam President, but certainly not least, I want to point out that this conference report includes provisions strongly in support of our ally, the State of Israel. Unfortunately, we've seen a disturbing trend in recent years where some nations are attempting to discriminate against Israeli-made goods for political reasons. This legislation creates a new principal trade negotiating objective under Trade Promotion Authority designed to discourage these unfair practices against Israel. Once this conference report becomes law, if a foreign nation proposes a new trade agreement with the United States, that nation will need to demonstrate that it does not have politically motivated discriminatory commercial policies in place against our strongest ally in the Middle East. I want to commend Senator Cardin and others who've worked diligently to update our trade laws with respect to harmful actions against the State of Israel. And I'm pleased that we are finally seeing these efforts come to fruition. Madam President, enactment of this legislation into law will represent a win for American manufacturers and farmers, a win for American producers who have been harmed by unfairly traded Chinese goods, a win for small business owners looking to engage in global commerce, a win for consumers who depend upon Internet access that is accessible and affordable, and a win for those of us who want to stand up in support of the State of Israel when that nation is being unfairly targeted. But all of that will be at risk if we do not pass this conference report. The House of Representatives has been very clear that it will not take up this bill again. All the good things in this bill that I mentioned will die. They will not become law if we do not pass the conference report as it is. The House approved this conference report over a month and a half ago, and it is past time that we do the same. Let's get this done today and send this bill to the President for his signature. And let's continue to work together on other issues that still need to be addressed. Madam President, I want to thank Finance Committee Chairman Hatch and Ranking Member Wyden for all their hard work in getting us to this point. And I hope that the United States Senate will go on record, and I urge my colleagues to support this important trade enforcement legislation. And I hope, Madam President, what will be a very big and decisive vote. This legislation is good for America, and it demonstrates once again that the United States Senate takes seriously its responsibility to get results and get things done for the American people. It's good for our economy, it's good for jobs, it's good for the overall health and vitality of our country. Madam President, I yield the floor.